If you've been trying to prepare for IELTS but are not sure where to begin, fear not. My name is Alina. I'm an IELTS instructor with 10 years of experience here to guide you through this IELTS crash course. Let's get the ball rolling. In this video, I'll be covering everything a test taker needs to know in order to score high on IELTS Academic Writing Task 1. After watching this video, you'll be able to write your first line graph description. Please leave it in the comment section below and come back next week for a new video where I will provide some feedback on your descriptions. So be sure to subscribe in order not to miss the new video. So first of all, to achieve your IELTS goals, it's important to understand what you're expected to do and how your writing is evaluated. We will start with a quick overview of the requirements of the task. So for the first task, you have around 20 minutes at your disposal. Once again, you have to manage your own time as you are given 1 hour to complete 2 tasks. Since the second task, which is an essay, is worth 2/3 of the points for the writing section, and the first one is worth 1/3 of your points, it's not recommended to spend more than 20 minutes on the first task. In the first task, you need to write at least 150 words, and I expect it to describe a graph, a chart, a table, a diagram, or a map. To score high on this task, it's important to understand how your writing is evaluated. So here are the official IELTS band descriptors, which are published on the British Council website. It's a good idea to take your time and familiarize yourself with it. So now let's cover each evaluation criteria. There are 4 of them altogether. So we have task achievement, coherence and cohesion, lexical resource, vocabulary, and grammatical range and accuracy, or how correctly you use your grammar and the variety of grammar structures that you use. So the criteria are weighted equally, and the score for the task is the average. So for instance, if you get 6 for task achievement as well as coherence and cohesion, 7 for vocabulary, and 6.5 for the use of grammar, the total score for this task will be 6.5. The score is always rounded up in a test taker's favor, meaning that 5.8 would give you a 6, and 6.1, 6.2 would give you a 6.5. Now, to understand what each of these 4 criteria really means, we will take a line graph description that I wrote and see how it meets the requirements and expectations of the IELTS exam on each of the 4 criteria. Once we've done that, we will make a checklist of what we need to achieve the desired score. So the first criteria we need to be mindful of is task achievement. Here, according to the band descriptors, for the highest score of 9, a test taker needs to fulfill all the requirements of the task. And what are they? Well, of course, you need to write at least 150 words and summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Going back to the band descriptors, they give us more details. Here, Band 8 task achievement. key features should be presented and illustrated or extended. Then 7. Main trends and differences should be identified. So once again, what you need to do is to identify and highlight main or key features, support them with the data from the graph, highlight main trends, differences, and stages, and make comparisons. Now let's take a closer look at what it all means and what you need to include in your graph description. First of all, what are key features and how to identify them? In a line graph, it's pretty easy to identify key features, and for the purpose of this video, we will focus only on line graphs. How to identify key features in other types of graphs will be covered in another video. So the graph that we have shows a change in the number of 15-year-olds with low literacy levels over the course of 9 years. What is important for us here? If we have a timeline, and it concerns all graphs where you have a timeline. So if you have a timeline, you need to highlight the change over the given period of time. If you compare the beginning and the end of the period, what changed? So the number of students with low literacy level increased in all countries except for Denmark. So this is what we need to highlight. In this case, our key feature will be as follows. Denmark was the only country to see a slight improvement in reading skills among 15-year-old adolescents. Once we have identified a key feature, we need to carefully select the data that illustrates and supports what we are saying. As a supporting detail, we can mention that this decline was relatively small, actually from 17 to 15%, yet because of this small decline, Denmark, look, at the end of the period, Denmark became the country with the lowest number of teenagers with poor literacy skills, even though at the beginning of the period, it had the highest number of adolescents struggling with reading and writing. Here we have an important change to highlight and also an opportunity to make a comparison. Don't forget to make comparisons when you provide supporting details, as they are a prerequisite for a high score for task achievement. Don't forget to make comparisons when providing supporting details, as comparisons are a prerequisite for a high score for task achievement. So, as supporting details, we can write the following. So, despite the fact that the change was marginal, or meaning small, and did not exceed 2%, that was from 17 to 15, right? It took Denmark from the top to the bottom of the list, making it the country with the lowest share of 15-year-olds with literacy difficulties at the end of the period in question. There should be a backspace, of course, here. Lowest share should be two separate words, of course. So now let's move on to the next key feature. We have mentioned that Denmark was the only country where the number of students with low literacy levels decreased. In other words, there was some improvement in the literacy level of teenagers in Denmark. All other countries, however, they saw a rise in low literacy rates, and the number of students who struggled with reading and writing increased. So this is our second key feature. In the majority of countries, the proportion of adolescents with poor reading skills went up. Now, what supporting features can we mention here, and what comparisons can we make? What's the difference between the three countries which experienced a growth in the number of students with low literacy levels? So the first thing that you will notice here is that Austria experienced the most significant increase in the number of adolescents with literacy difficulties. This number increased from just under 15 to 27, so approximately by 13%, or in other words, it's almost doubled. While in Ireland and Sweden, the change was much less significant, let's say around 5% for Ireland, right? Moreover, as a result of these changes, look at the gap between Austria and other countries, it widened at the end of the period in question. These are important changes to highlight, and they also offer an opportunity to make comparisons, which is highly important once again. So we have the following. So remember, this is our second key feature, and these are the details that we have just highlighted, the main important differences. So in this country, the share of adolescents, and we are talking about Austria right now, right? So in this country, the share of adolescents with literacy difficulties exceeded that in other nations throughout the given period, except for the year 2000, when literacy rate was 2% higher in Austria than in Denmark. Over the course of 9 years, the number of school children with weak literacy almost doubled in Austria, with nearly every fourth adolescent having poor reading skills by 2009. Meanwhile, Ireland and Sweden both saw a steady decline of literacy rate among 15-year-olds, ending the period at 17%, which was still markedly lower than in Austria. As a result, while the difference in literacy rates between Austria, Sweden, and Denmark was insignificant in 2000, the gap between them widened to the end of 2009. So once again, your checklist for the task achievement has 3 main points, and they are key features, supporting examples and comparisons, and main trends. We will work on the structure of this task in a separate video. This time we are focusing only on the evaluation criteria, and we'll now move on to the next one. So another criteria to be mindful of is coherence and cohesion. So what does it mean, and how to score high for this criteria? Coherence means that your description is logical and that you are consistent. All the parts of your description are connected and are all heading in the same direction. It's an extremely important quality of any piece of writing. If your writing is incoherent, you're jumping from one idea to another
and it's difficult to follow your train of thoughts.
So it is important that the description progresses logically. What is mentioned in the introduction is then further developed in the body paragraphs and is summarized in the conclusion. In a graph description, the conclusion is actually optional as long as you clearly mention key features in the introduction or in the body, at least in the body paragraphs, and develop them properly. So for example, look here how cohesion works. In the introduction, we mentioned that overall the share of adolescents with literacy difficulties increased in all countries on the list except for Denmark. So our introduction covers all countries, and then in the key feature we separate the first key feature and we take only one, Denmark, the country which saw improvements in reading skills. In the second key feature, on the other hand, we take the other three countries where the trend was opposite. We have conversely, in the majority of countries, the proportion of adolescents with poor reading skills went up. And again, in the conclusion, you can recap it, but once again, conclusion is optional in the graph description. But you can mention, you can paraphrase, of course it will, if you are able to paraphrase the same idea 3 times in the introduction, in the key feature, and then again in the conclusion, you show a wide range of the vocabulary, and your score for lexical resources will definitely go up because basically you are expressing the same idea 3 times using different vocabulary. So in conclusion, the overall literacy rate in the 4 European countries declined, with the only exception of Denmark, where literacy statistics improved slightly. So your paragraphs should also be coherent. So previously we talked about coherence of the whole graph description, but within the paragraph there should also be coherence. What it means is that your paragraphs should be logical. They should have a topic sentence with the main features and supporting details that illustrate this feature. And remember that each paragraph should have a very clear focus and a topic sentence. So this is highly important. So if you mention in one paragraph only the upward trend, then focus only on that. And this will always usually be the case with line graphs, where in one key feature you have an upward trend, and in the second key feature you have the opposite, downward trend. So now we have covered coherence, but what is cohesion? Because as you remember, the evaluation criteria is coherence and cohesion. So cohesion refers to how the content of a sentence of a text is linked together to create meaning. And cohesion needs to be achieved within a sentence, within a paragraph, and even across paragraphs. So let's take a look at how cohesion can be achieved within a sentence. For example, here we have, while the difference in literacy rates between Austria, Sweden, and Denmark was insignificant in 2000, the gap between them widened to the end of 2009. So here, a very easy cohesive device is just a pronoun. So we connect the idea, and instead of repeating the same words Austria, Sweden, and Denmark, we just use a pronoun. And again, while a very common cohesive device connects the parts of the sentence and makes the sentence easy to read, it facilitates the flow of the sentence. It's easy to understand what you want to express. So here we have an example of cohesion within a paragraph or between sentences. So at the end of the given period, the number of school children with weak literacy almost doubled in Austria, with nearly every fourth adolescent having poor reading skills. Meanwhile, we want to show the opposite trend. Ireland and Sweden both saw a steady decline of literacy rate among 15-year-olds, ending the period at 17%, which was still markedly lower than in Austria. And we connect the next sentence: as a result, as a consequence, while the difference in literacy rates between Austria, Sweden, and Denmark was insignificant in 2000, the gap between them widened to the end of 2009. These are the same sentences as we have already covered before. You should be well familiar with them and should be aware of what we are talking about. So, and let's take a look at how cohesion works across paragraphs. So I will not read the whole paragraph because you are already familiar with this. So here in the first paragraph, we are mentioning that Denmark, again, was the only country to see some improvement in reading skills among 15-year-old adolescents. In the second paragraph, which is actually the third paragraph because there is an introduction as well, we express the opposite trend, so we use conversely to prepare the reader to the opposite idea, and that assists cohesion.
Cohesive devices merit a tutorial of their own. For the purpose of this session, we will focus just on a few of them.
The most well-known cohesive device is a pronoun. Pronouns allow you to refer back to a noun without repeating it. Paraphrasing, by the way, is also a cohesive device. So here, let's take a look at two sentences without the use of a pronoun. We have: the change was marginal and did not exceed 2%. Nevertheless, the change took Denmark from the top to the bottom of the list. Now, with a pronoun, these two sentences will be much easier to follow. The change was marginal and did not exceed 2%. Nevertheless, it took Denmark from the top to the bottom of the list. Connectives are also cohesive devices. You should be well familiar with them. Let's take a look at how to use some of the most common of them and see how they make a text more cohesive. So first of all, here we have overall in the introduction. Then in the first paragraph, according to the report, referring to the source of our data. Then we have despite the fact that, to show contrast, conversely, to serve the same purpose, and however, meanwhile, as a result, and in conclusion. Let's take a look at some more of them. The most common connectives that you are well familiar with are connectives of addition, including and, moreover, as well as, furthermore, and also. Another common connectives are connectives of time, next, then, finally, meanwhile, and eventually. Connectors, of cause and effect, are also a great help, and they help to make your description much more cohesive. Connectives of contrast, including however, alternatively, although, except, unless, conversely, are extremely useful, especially for grouping. For instance, take a look at this sentence. In Austria, the share of adolescents with literacy difficulties exceeded that in other nations throughout the given period, except for the first 2 years of the period when Denmark had the highest number of students who were struggling with reading and writing. First of all, it turns these 3 sentences into just one. Perfect. An excellent cohesive device. The third evaluation criteria is the vocabulary. Here we are mainly concerned with the correct use of the vocabulary and its range, variety, and complexity. I personally find the Cambridge reference to be the most accurate here. So to achieve a 6 for the vocabulary, you need to correctly use B2 level vocabulary. For 6.5, you already need to expand the range of your vocabulary and include some C1 words and collocations. Those who are aiming for an 8 would need to use at least some C2 vocabulary. An 8.5 would require an even wider range of C1 vocabulary, more C2 level words and collocations. In a nutshell, there are several tips that can help you improve the range of the vocabulary in your graph description, and we will quickly cover some of them.
So first of all, remember the style. You're writing a graph description, not chatting to a friend. Mind your choice of words. Use academic, formal style and avoid the use of colloquial expressions, phrasal verbs, and of course, slang.
So let's see that in action. Here we have several examples with the use of phrasal verbs and colloquial expressions. The most popular meal in 1970, fish and chips, gave up its position and was chosen even rarer than pizza. A much better way would be to write the most popular meal in 1970, fish and chips, lost its leading position on the market and slumped to the bottom of the list. So here you are not only getting rid of the phrasal verb gave up, which would be perfect in speaking or even in the first task general module. When you have informal letters, you can even write that. This would be perfectly suitable. But in academic module task 1 or task 2, that would be an inappropriate choice of words. Moreover, we also use some higher level vocabulary. Slumped, lost its leading position on the market. Again, the second example that we have here once again has a phrasal verb check out. So the study checked out the effect of eating fast food on the health of kids. Much better to avoid the words of kids and to use children instead, and the same goes for guys. Guys is perfect for speaking, but in the writing try to stick to men, boys. And the example which would be much better in this case is the study examined the health effects of fast food consumption in children. So secondly, use less common words. For instance, here we have the example, the change was very small, just under 2%. Small is a very easy A1 level vocabulary. It doesn't allow you to show the examiner that you have a wide range of vocabulary. In this case, a much better way would be to write the change was marginal and did not exceed 2%. You have a higher level vocabulary, marginal, and to exceed. Another example of less common vocabulary, here we have a very common adjective, the gap became bigger, the gap widened would be a better alternative. Moreover, to show your command of the language, it's also a good idea to add adverbs to your verbs when you describe changes. In this way, you will show the examiner that you have a much wider range of vocabulary. For instance, let's take the following sentence. Literacy statistics improved. For a higher score and more accurate description, it's better to specify what kind of improvement was there. For instance, literacy statistics improved markedly, or slightly, or just marginally. Similarly, by adding adjectives to nouns, you can not only describe trends and changes better, but will also show a wider range of the vocabulary. Let's take the following sentence as an example. Denmark was the only country to see improvement in reading skills among 15-year-old adolescents. Here, the word improvement can be modified by an adjective. This would make the description way more accurate. Denmark was the only country to see a slight or marginal or significant improvement in reading skills among 15-year-old adolescents. Another example, Sweden saw a decline of literacy rate among 15-year-olds. But what kind of a decline? A significant decline, or a slight and marginal, or maybe a steady decline that continued over several years? Adjectives do make a difference here. So better way to write to express the same idea would be Sweden saw a steady decline of literacy rate among 15-year-olds. One more way to improve your score for vocabulary is to use words instead of numbers. So for instance, instead of writing 10%, you can say 1 out of 10 respondents or survey participants, or in this case also a minority. Instead of writing 23-24%, and on IELTS you will see a lot of approximations. It will not be necessarily 25%, but just around 25%. This is usually done on purpose to give you an opportunity to express linguistically exactly this idea, just over or just under or nearly or almost 25%. So please don't miss this opportunity. And then again, instead of writing 25%, better to write a quarter, nearly a quarter, almost a quarter, just under a quarter, just over a quarter. Play with these words as you like, but please don't write 23 or 25% in numbers. You can also use 1 out of 4 respondents, or 1 out of 4 survey participants, or 1 out of 4 adolescents, depending on what you have in your particular graph. Every 4th respondent or every 4th survey participant is also an option. So for 33%, you can say almost a third, or 3 out of 10 respondents, 3 out of 10 survey participants. For 52%, that's almost a half, or nearly a half, or just under a half, just over a half. Or another favorite of mine, every other respondent or every other survey participant. For the range 73-77%, you can use again nearly, 3/4, almost 3/4, just under 3/4, just over 3/4, or 3 out of 4 respondents, 3 out of 4 survey participants, or even a majority. If it goes over 80% or 90%, you can even use a vast majority. The last criteria is grammatical range and accuracy. And similar to the use of the vocabulary, here we are primarily concerned with the correct use of grammar and its range, variety, and complexity. You also need to be mindful of punctuation. Once again, the Cambridge reference comes in very handy here. So to achieve a 6 for the use of grammar, you need to use B2 grammar structures. For 6.5, you already need to expand the variety of your grammar structures and to include some C1 structures. Those who are aiming for an 8 would need to use at least some C2 grammar. In this tutorial, we will cover only a couple of examples. A more detailed look at complex grammar structures and their use is covered in a separate video. So first of all, make comparisons. So instead of writing Ireland and Sweden both saw a steady decline of literacy rate among 15-year-olds, and at the end of the period the literacy rate in these countries was 17%. Meanwhile, the rate in Austria was 27%. So it's much better to unite this sentence into one sentence and to use a comparison. So Ireland and Sweden both saw a steady decline of literacy rate among 15-year-olds, ending the period at 17%, which was still markedly lower than in Austria. Second, use participle clauses, and this is your gerund, ing, verb with ing ending. So here, instead of writing, according to the report, Denmark was the only country to see a slight improvement in reading skills among 15-year-old adolescents. This change was marginal and did not exceed 2%. However, as a result of this change, Denmark came to the bottom of the list and had the lowest share of 15-year-olds with literacy difficulties at the end of the period in question. So here, take a look at the participle that we want to use, making, and how it helps us to turn these two sentences into one sentence, despite the fact that the change was marginal and did not exceed 2%. It took Denmark from the top to the bottom of the list, making it a country with the lowest share of 15-year-olds with literacy difficulties at the end of the period in question. Thirdly, use participial clauses with a subject. And here you have a good example. Conversely, in the majority of countries, the proportion of adolescents with poor reading skills went up. The most significant rise was in Austria. Once again, with the use of a participle, we can turn these two sentences into one. Conversely, in the majority of countries, the proportion of adolescents with poor reading skills went up, with Austria experiencing the most significant rise. And last but not least, use expressions to group and compare. So here we have an example, two sentences. Overall, the share of adolescents with literacy difficulties increased in Austria, Ireland, and Sweden. Denmark experienced the opposite trend. So instead of saying Denmark experienced the opposite trend, we can simply use except for. And this will make our sentence way more concise. Look, overall, the share of adolescents with literacy difficulties increased in all countries on the list except for Denmark. So to recap, you have 20 minutes to complete the first writing task. You need to write at least 150 words. You will be asked to describe a graph, a chart, a table, or a diagram. There are several things to keep in mind. Be sure not to use memorized sentences, as you will be penalized for it. Use a wide range of vocabulary and grammar. Make sure your response highlights key features and main trends. And don't forget to provide relevant supporting examples. And finally, make comparisons. Do not make any assumptions. Do not express your opinion in academic writing task 1, once again, which makes the first writing task very different from the second one, where you are often directly asked to express your opinion. And last but not least, stick to an academic style.
So if you have been following along and you would like to try your hand at the graph description, then certainly give it a go. This will help you learning to stick. I don't want to overwhelm you, so we will take a very similar line graph. Please leave your descriptions in the comment section below, and next week we will cover this line graph in details and I will provide some feedback on your writing. Subscribe to see more of my videos and come back next week for a new video. Until next time, and remember, perseverance is the key.